Going to move back into the BBC and how the BBC reports on the wars. Let's have a look at this page here. Now, I've put a title in: BBC balances the Gaza dead against Israeli military operations, and this is the top line there, where you've got bullet holes, gutted rooms, a father that lost all his children. Then it moves across to Bolivia's comments as it severs diplomatic ties, but eventually we get into the Israeli military operations. And if we go further down the BBC page, then we get most watched. And of course, this tells us a lot, because what is the audience looking at? The horror of the death and destruction of families in Gaza. So that's number one. They're also looking at the bombing going on, number two. But then we can see how effective the BBC is, because three is utter dross, in my opinion, which is to do with Cliff Richard mixing up artificial insemination and AI. But this is the level of audience that the BBC has themselves created. And if we go on down, we divert attention from Israel's attacks on Gaza with new claims of Russian civilian attacks. And this, of course, is on the war in Ukraine page. But this interested me in particular because right at the bottom of this page was a tiny, tiny map of the war in Ukraine. So I was very interested in this. And when I had a look, what I found in that map section were these headlines. They're in the order I found them. They're right at the top, and I'm now putting the dates of them on screen. So basically, the BBC has frozen the war in Ukraine because the counteroffensive has not worked as the West wanted. The Russians are now starting to move forward. There is a horrific fighting. The BBC's response is simply not to report via the maps. But if we remember, the maps themselves were produced by the Institute for the Study of the War and the American Enterprise Institute's Critical Threats Project. And if we get into the detail about that, beg your pardon, let's just come back onto this one. If we get into the detail of that, we will see that this is to inform and educate policymakers, intelligence and military communities, and all interested citizens who need to understand the nuances and scale of threats to American security. So the BBC is following American policy, but they're doing it in a slightly devious way. And if you get into AEI itself, you can see the sorts of things they cover here, from prosperity to protecting national security. So don't just read the BBC, really look at what they're presenting, how they're presenting, and look at where they're getting their information from, because very often it's absolutely biased in favor of the people who seem to want to prosecute the war in the Middle East and Ukraine. Alex, let's bring you